Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to a new edition of Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the week's most important headlines with some added context. My name is Zoe Lindsay. I am joined today by three of my teammates, Nick Dixon,
Hey, everyone.
Justin Kakani,
How's it
and
going?
Joel.
Hey, buddy.
And we are going to dive right in because we've got a good deal to cover today, starting as always with our critical security update stories. The biggest patch of the year from Android came out just a few days ago. Google released its September patch with 120 fixes, including 2 vulnerabilities already being actively exploited. The patches covered Linux kernel, Android runtime, Qualcomm components, and the Power VR GPU. As always, anytime we're talking about an Android update story, Pixel users and users of Google OEM devices will get prompt updates. Device users from other manufacturers may have a delay depending on continuing support. Let's see. Most of the vulnerabilities are rated high severity with a few critical issues, and only about 4% of the US market share of Android devices are Pixel users. In terms of mitigations, as always, when new patches are available, as soon as viable, go ahead and do that update, especially if you are a Pixel user, because you will have that available sooner. So let's see. We've got, how do you handle Android devices that are either too old or no longer getting manufacturer supported updates? Mike, I imagine you've got some experience with this.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like, what are you using the devices for? You can lock down Android devices that are out of date. And most of honestly, like the vast majority of Android vulnerabilities are going to come through apps. So, like, they may be in the OS itself, but they're triggered through downloading malicious apps, right? Like apps that are weird one-off. They get taken over. The developer account gets taken over, and they push a bad version. So you can really protect yourself on step one, clean your apps up, right? Only keep the things you use. Is It's a bit of a like digital hoarding situation, right? Like these things have permissions on your phones. They'll come back
Right.
to haunt you if you don't clean things up. But yeah, aside from that, if you're worried about more of the Wi-Fi vector attacks. There's not really a lot you can do once you have an end-of-life phone, or if you're just on a phone that has, very frequent or infrequent patches. It's almost worth upgrading at this point. I will say, like, some of the manufacturers, and especially Google, do have a decent long tail as far as like supporting devices. It's a lot better than it used to be, where it's like I bought this thing and a year later it's gone. But be aware when you buy it how old the actual phone is as well, because that matters.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a good call out that, it definitely does vary manufacturer to manufacturer, but I do think that there's been a strong trend in general of supporting those devices for longer rather than, a year into a 2-year contract, pushing folks to update if they want to still get security updates, which is, I think, more where we were earlier on in Android's development history.
Yep.
And for folks that may not have a defined MDM budget, but are still trying to get a handle on both Android and iOS devices that are in their environment, are there any free, either inbuilt within the OS or free to use MDM tools that we may recommend for folks to take a look at?
There can be. It depends on, this is going to depend on like how big your fleet is. What type of device are these, like BYOD? Are they, corporate owned? A lot of that can play into effect. If you have small pools of devices, you definitely can get away with like free MDM. A lot of the platforms have it built in now. Let's say if you're a Google Workspace shop, like you can set that up without buying an extra license for MDM. You don't get all of the fun features that you would from buying MDM licenses, but there's some amount of protection and control you can get. I believe Microsoft also has a free tier on their MDM as well, but it's like limited. But some control is better than no control. BYOD gets tough. If you don't own the device, you're up to you're basically controlling policies at that point, and maybe doing posture checks if you can during logins, that type of stuff. But I would take that into your risk register and just thought process when you're building out systems as far as like what's connecting.
And moving on to our next story, we have a couple more TP-Link router flaws that CISA has added to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. This is affecting router models, both of which have reached end-of-life status, but did get emergency firmware updates. The known exploited pattern was linked to the Quad 7 botnet, operated by a Chinese threat actor group called Storm 0940. CISA has advised federal agencies they have until the 24th of this month to implement mitigations. And this follows another TP-Link vulnerability being added earlier this week as well. So we've got 3 CVEs here, a authentication bypass affecting the HTTPD service on port 80, which can lead to credential disclosure, and 8.6, allowing OS command injection, affecting the Archer C7 and, oh boy, here we go, TL-WR841N/ND parentheses MS version, which can lead to remote code execution. And a third flaw, 8.8, this one, in the Wi-Fi range extender, TL-WA855RE. We'll add details on those back to the original advisory so you can take a look. As mentioned, there has been an emergency firmware release added, and TP-Link is also recommending updating to new hardware that is currently being covered. So we've talked about some other vulnerabilities like this in the past, and I think it's a pretty common conversation to talk about the idea of shadow IT, unapproved devices that folks are using to avoid company processes or approved tools. This, I think, could be more an example of more like adopted or inherited IT, where it wasn't a effort to go around infrastructure, but oftentimes for a lot of organizations, having folks that move to remote work, they are suddenly kind of inheriting this consumer grade equipment for those folks that are working from home. So what are some considerations for folks that are trying to manage those kinds of hybrid environments where their teams could be working really from anywhere? And anything that you would advise for folks that are using these end-of-life devices at home?
Yeah, I feel like a broken record here because I always say this term on these calls, but network segmentation is huge. Make sure that these users aren't able to connect to other things that they shouldn't need to connect to do their day-to-day work, as well as the classic MFA, SSO, locking down as much as you can before users can or attackers can pivot from the user device to your internal network. Just the classic, security architecture things can really mitigate risk with this kind of thing, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and if I could add on to what Nick is saying too, like number one, I want to call out that I think it's great that TP-Link is offering an emergency patch. I think it's important in these situations that we give kudos where
Yeah.
we can.
Agreed.
The other thing too is visibility. You control the endpoint. You should be able to get visibility on that, at least business controlled endpoint. You're not going to be able to completely eliminate risk 100%. Mike will probably be the one to ask about that right now. But yeah, visibility on the endpoint itself that you control. And I know I'm also going to sound like a broken record here, but you don't know what you don't know. So it's important to gain at least situational visibility into what your users are using at home potentially in some instances. And I think that largely too depends on manpower that you currently have on your team. But there's also other ways to go about doing that. And then I'd probably say like the at least one of the things that I would recommend is maybe offer a select or have a budget in place or a plan in place in case people do want to get new equipment. That way you kind of control the flow, the influx of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to mention too that I know a lot of people try not to use this technology anymore, TP-Link, um, just because of who owns them and things in the past. But I will say, similarly to our previous story, a lot of TP-Link vulnerabilities are related to software rather than TP-Link itself. So, as Mike mentioned in the previous story, locking down what software is available, if possible, would really mitigate risk too.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I'm not sure like what a good consumer grade router or wireless access point is at this point, like that everyone can set up and also just like go to a big box store and buy. So we're kind of in this situation where, what's the least bad one?
Yeah.
I think the least bad one is treating them all the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I know people have these. I know the range extenders are like very popular because you can just slap them in a plug and put it next to a machine, right? Like versus buying actual architected network gear and procuring that through your vendor, right? Like that's a like, oh, this thing can't connect to the Wi-Fi. Run out to Best Buy,
Right.
$30.
Hmm.
We have it working. Like at home, I'm a huge fan of hardware networks, but I'm a crazy person and my network rivals most, enterprises. So I don't expect most people to do that. I think really all you can do these days is, try to just protect against people connecting in hostile environments, and you treat people's homes as hostile environments the same way you would if they're laptops at a coffee shop, right? So it's SSL everywhere, connecting back in through trusted points, doing posture checks, all the hard stuff. But that's kind of what you have to do when you're outside your network. The funny thing about this is, if everyone's wondering why like IP block lists don't work anymore, this is the exact reason. Almost, like I would love to know, like research wise, what percentage of actual routers in people's homes are like part of a botnet, because I bet it's pretty high.
Yeah.
And the traffic is just, it looks like normal traffic, and the ISPs don't block it because they most of the time aren't doing malicious stuff. It's just proxying through a network. So
Justin, this one may be more for you. If admins are trying to advise their team on activity to watch out for, what are some potential indicators to let them know to watch for that there may be botnet activity on their network?
Yeah, it's like Mike was saying, it's going to be very hard, especially since we don't have visibility into what those routers are typically doing.
Right.
So it really comes down to, I think, a strong mix of like user awareness training, making sure that your users know what suspicious activity to look out for and that they're always being vigilant. And I like your analogy of like treating every laptop like it's at a coffee shop, Mike, or like
yep.
they're going to a conference. And that's really, I think, the best advice you can give people who have remote workers like this.
Yeah, you should make everyone freak out when they get weird DNS errors in their browser or like cert pinging. It does happen, but it's not as common as, it's not as common in errors as it is in attacks. So
Yeah.
Sure. Taking a look at our most changed trends of the week, starting as we always do with threats. We've got a DFIR report alert for DC rat command and control, a RDP connection from a public IP alert, specifically through Checkpoint, I expect that if we were to look at RDP connections from a public IP overall, we would see it much higher than in the most changed trends. Anomalous behavior alert from AWS Guard Duty, suspicious double extension file execution, and rounding out our top 5, a FortiGate SSL VPN anomalous access attempt, which we saw a big increase on over the last couple of weeks. Thoughts, notes on these most changed threat trends?
The guard duty one is not surprising to me, given some of the like recent chatter we've seen regarding like AWS environments being targeted. I'm not at all surprised by an RDP connection from public IP being reported. Um, the FortiGate one though sticks out to me the most.
Agreed.
Yeah. We're noticing a lot of traffic from the internet just hammering VPNs. We've talked about Sonic Wall VPN in the past couple calls, Blumira briefings, and FortiGate seems to be ticking up as well.
Yeah. Good thing to watch out for if you're relying on that hardware for your environment. Looking at suspects, we've got a abnormal PowerShell task, LSAS read with PyPyCats, potential ransomware activity alert through Microsoft 365, PUA for ping castle activity, and a service registry permissions weakness. So again, threats don't necessarily represent active exploit attempts, but they are a higher level of concerning behavior meriting attention. So hasn't moved up into that absolutely malicious activity, but definitely on the list of things that you're going to want to check out. We have a API key generated for Google Cloud Platform, Linux logging service shutdown, a LastPass master use password reuse policy violation, 50 or more file copy events within 15 minutes on SharePoint, and files shared with personal email addresses through Microsoft 365. So again, those risks categories are more potential issues that should be looked at when you have some time to get in front of potential problems down the line. There are a million relatively benign reasons why someone might share with a personal email address or clear out a folder that's no longer needed, but those could also be early indicators of potential data exfiltration or, trying to remove data after it's been exfiltrated as part of a ransomware attack. So anything stand out here? I know we're going to be talking about Google Cloud API keys in just a moment. So we'll touch back on that one, but any others?
Yeah, there was one that didn't get called out, but I do want to call out, which is disabling a multi-factor authentication on Azure AD user or Entra ID user. That is for sure a risk, and I'm sure there's legitimate reasons why that can exist, but like my mind immediately goes to someone trying to subvert your policies or weaken defenses. So that one really stuck out, especially that it's on the rise and not on the decline. So if you do have MFA enabled in your Entra environment, double check that it's fully configured for everyone, especially your global admins. Follow best practices. There's tons of great articles out there, so I won't go through the litany of all the best practices out there, but that one stuck out the most to me out of all of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm very surprised to see that LastPass one pop up the way it is. That's been around for a while here at Blumira. I don't know of any changes that have happened, so it'd be interesting to investigate those if your org is seeing those happen.
Yeah, definitely. As just teased, looking at API key use and misuse on Google Cloud and elsewhere, Deep Spectre has discovered a large-scale phishing as a service operation active for several years that impersonated multiple Fortune 500 companies for the purpose of spreading malware, promoting gambling sites, and stealing credentials. The threat actors used Google Cloud and Cloudflare infrastructure, taking advantage of companies' expired or dormant domains to abuse the already established trust with end users on sites that were previously legitimate. The threat actors used cloaking to share a expired domain, which the threat actor cloned from the actual org and shared it with a gambling website. So, for example, one page would be a gambling site, another would be a fake login page for an org under the same domain. This is a industrial scale impersonation scheme abusing about 48,000 hosts and more than 80 clusters. Not a new attack, but the size and the scale is noteworthy. Also, the fact that it affected multiple Fortune 500 companies, including many sites which were loading resources from the original cloud infrastructure to make that even a little bit harder to sniff out. So for mitigations, make sure that you're managing and regularly checking back on expired or dormant domains within your organization, that you're using threat intelligence monitoring where possible. So if there's folks that are listening that don't currently or aren't confident that they have a comprehensive inventory of domains that are under their org's control, what are some tips or what are some good first steps to go about building that complete assessment of, the surface that needs to be managed?
It's a tough, depending on the size of the org, this can be a very tough problem. And I'll literally hire companies to handle this for them and do takedowns, right? Just because, they may not know all the domains, but there are some tools out there where you can query the registrars to see if your data, you can search for your address, right, to see who's registered your domains. They are okay. I won't recommend any because with Privacy Shield, no one, it's less and less useful all the time. I would definitely say if you do have e-discovery capabilities, searching through mail for domain registration emails, probably not a bad idea. If it's that out of control, otherwise, know who your registrars are, have a blessed one, so that you can go in and look and see which domains you own, and keep on track of who which ones are expired or not, right? Yeah, this is one of those things where it's I'm very nervous for the next 10 years of just the sheer scale of the internet in the last maybe 5 years, as far as companies spinning up and down, people building products, shutting them down, right? I think I saw, we don't have time for it in the show, but there was an NPM hack that came from them having a separate domain that they don't use for anything, and they never set up DKIM or SPF, and someone spoofed emails on that domain, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of this topic is going to be a problem for a while, and it's very funny because I feel like it just comes back to inventory your stuff and
Yeah.
keep track of your assets, right?
Yeah, and it also brings back to mind this old story of Google buying up common misspelling domains of Google, so maybe 3 O's or 4 O's or 1 O. So that also might be a strategy that certain orgs may want to also consider, is buying up potential common misspellings, or even if let's say your .com, maybe think about also getting your .net, and any other potential top level domains there. Like Mike said, this is an incredibly tough problem, and I like that he brought up SPF and DKIM. If you're not already doing those things, go ahead and try and implement those
Oh,
things.
just even if you don't even send email, set it up on the
Yeah.
domain.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, setting it up took only maybe 5 minutes. So if you have the time, do it.
Yeah. And you just touched on this a little bit, Justin, but are there any additional tips that we would give folks that are trying to mitigate the risk of brand impersonation? So not just the domains that they own directly, but those kind of look-alike or similarly spelled domains, like you said, other common TLD extensions. If they're using .com, getting .net or .io if they're in tech. Any other tips for folks that are trying to make sure that they've got a strong defense against this type of impersonation, taking advantage of their trust with their customers?
Yeah, it's tough. I would say if you are very public as a brand, or let's say the opposite is true, that you just kind of monitor what people are saying about your brand out there, keep an eye out for like false or fake social media pages that claim to be you, do frequent searches on that. Like it's right now, I think it's, and to Mike's point, like this is going to be a problem, probably has been a problem. It's just now coming to light for a very long time. Um, and I don't think that there's like a singular tool, at least that I've been made aware of, that like helps you in this process. So vigilance, I guess, would be the biggest thing. And try to think like an attacker or a brand impersonator from the get. I think will also go a long way.
There is like if I try to think of like one quick tip that people could do, especially if you're a very public domain and you're worried about like copycats, you can put so if people aren't aware, there's an open source tool called Canary tokens where you can generate different types of tokens and then run a server, and basically the token reaches out and creates an alert based on a few things, right? And one of the use cases you can use this for is embedding it either in an image or in maybe like a footer, right? Like somewhere in your branding, so that you know that if somebody clones a login page, right, or if they're cloning like an email and it's coming from a different domain or it's pointing at a different domain, you can get alerted. Sometimes like it's a good like step to take for free. Just throw your server up in AWS, have it run, and then trigger whatever alert, and it will at the very least let you know that like people are doing it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good call out, Mike. That I hadn't thought about that, but you're 100% correct, because I had previously thought of like using Canary tokens with like Entra sign-in pages or Google
yep.
Workspace sign-in pages. So yeah.
You guys mentioned it a little bit too, but I remember like it might have been like 10 years ago now. Checkpoint let their domain expire, and someone tried to snipe it. So my quick tip would be just calendar reminders for whoever's in charge, or put someone in charge, starters, and then secondly, have that person set some reminders to make sure you don't lose your domain to copycats and they start phishing all of your users.
Yeah. Turn auto renew on and make sure those payment methods are up to date.
Yes. Yeah.
You're gonna just afford a couple more years. It's probably worth it.
Yeah. And we're continuing to see fallout from the SalesLoft Drift breach. This one affecting, we're finding that it was a GitHub account compromise that led to that breach initially. So SalesLoft's Drift application had its GitHub account compromised and data exported by threat actor UNC 6395, UNC 6395, but more fun to say it, UNC. SalesLoft said with this access, the threat actor was able to download content from multiple repos, add a guest user, and establish workflows. 22 companies are known to have been impacted so far. SalesLoft has revoked Drift API keys and disabled the Drift application, and is recommending that all third-party applications integrated with Drift via API key proactively revoke that existing key. So with a window of several months of potential activity, what are some things that folks can do now to see if their team may have been affected by this SalesLoft breach, or if a vendor that they're using has been affected by this breach?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like, are you using SalesLoft? And then the second thing is, are you using Salesforce? Because the way this breach worked was they got into SalesLoft's GitHub account, right? the Mania basically did an investigation and found that they were able to get into GitHub Actions and then pivot into running actions into their AWS cloud. They were able to get Auth0 tokens, right? So SaaS service tokens, probably integration keys and API keys from the looks of it, and then pivot on into Salesforce and other Salesforce environments. We've kind of had like a trickle of stories of people basically coming out and saying, yes, we were part of this. 22, like the list is 22 now. Those are the ones we know about. If you're using any of these services, it's always good to know like what is impacted. UNC 6395, also known as Scattered Spider, or like the group loosely associated with the COM. So these folks have a bit of a different MO than most. They'll dwell for a while, grab all the data they can. They typically go after like support portals, support data, and you'll see in a lot of these breach disclosures that they're saying like we lost customer data, right? Emails, usernames, identifiable stuff, but then also customer support chats, right? So I think the big thing here is just keep in mind like what vendors you're interfacing with that might be potentially affected by this or could be in the future, right? We're using SalesLoft or Salesforce on their back end. And then, think through what have I chatted with them? Have I sent them any HAR files that might possibly have, API keys in them or session tokens? So it's kind of this is one of those third party breach incidents where it's going to sprawl for a while, and I don't think we're going to know the full impact just because these folks are probably sitting on a lot of chat history and currently going through and looking for all sorts of juicy stuff. So
And we've had a similar conversation in the past about cert renewals. Is this an argument for time limiting API key access or shortening the time before needing to rotate or update those keys? Or is that just adding another process to keep track of without necessarily adding much in the way of functional security?
I mean, secret sprawl is going to happen. This is just something that we all have to live with. There are certain ways that you can go about mitigating it. If this were my environment, I'm not saying that it is, but if this were mine, I would definitely think about rotating those keys and coming up with policies and procedures around it to make life not hard during that. I know I personally rotate like all of my local SSH keys once about every 90 days at the most. Password managers and stuff like that, and there's enterprise tools out there too, can help with this sort of thing. Secrets are going to end up where you don't want them to end up. I think that this harkens back to a lot of like there was a recent npm, somebody was a maintainer on an npm package and got phished. Similar thing with GitHub, but that one was resolved in about I think 6 hours from
yeah.
the time that he had noticed that he was compromised, and then said that, hey, if you have any of these downstream packages, you also might be affected. So I think auditing too, knowing where your secrets are being used, how they're currently being stored. And if this were me and I wasn't sure if I'm impacted by this Drift API key incident, I would just proactively reach out to all of my vendors. Just say, hey, were you affected?
Yeah, it's like there are some things you can do. In this case, the Drift API, it's just because of the nature of it. It's going to you're going to be embedding it in places that are probably less locked down, right? Less, more lower standards of SSL because you want everyone to connect, right? It's marketing data. Um, you're not going to be able to like do strict transport layer security as much for these things. You may be able on the back end to limit the API key or integration keys to like that known vendor's domains or IP space. The mileage may vary there, where it's like, I don't know, all of AWS. So there are some things you can do. I think the big lesson here is like GitHub Actions. That should be a very locked down place in your org, and the amount of people that have keys to it and the keys themselves should be scoped as limited as possible for the job that they are doing, right? It may be super easy to go. Our CI/CD platform just gets a full access key or an admin key in whatever it's deploying. But do you really need that, right? Like,
Right.
can you lower it a little bit at least? So
And then our last story for today is taking a look at some new research out of Thales showing that remote access software and service abuse is the most common pre-ransomware indicator. They were examining tactics used by cybercriminals to get enterprise level admin access to domains before deploying ransomware. Which they said is showing that being able to rapidly respond within 1 or 2 days can prevent almost a third of ransomware execution. So this is misuse of legitimate remote services like RDP, PSExec, PowerShell, and remote access software, including some of those that we see in our most common trends. Then using credential dumping techniques, we're seeing a increase in the frequency of use of info stealers right now as well, which is also going to be hunting after those credentials and sensitive data. Then the use of network discovery tools, and looking for multi-factor or using multi-factor as a preventative method, watching for EDR and MDR alerts, keeping an eye on CISA alerts for active campaigns, and making use of strong security restrictions within the organization are all some of the best ways to help reduce your risk here. So, we often give the advice, if you've got to use a remote access or remote desktop tool, pick one and standardize on it so that you know if something else is being used in the environment. Any other top level tips for helping to mitigate the risk of remote access tools being abused? I mean, going back to Scattered Spider, we've seen them using social engineering to talk users into setting up some of these tools in the past. Certainly not unique to that campaign, but they've made have a use of it. So, any tips that we can share?
Yeah, you mentioned quick response mitigated almost a third of these incidents. In order to have quick response, you need to be alerted quickly. And in order to have an alert quickly, you need to have good visibility.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the biggest things alongside the standard, like lock down whatever tools you're using, make sure that everything is scoped properly. Um, we need to treat anything that you can, like, I mean, you're accessing this potentially across the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to make sure that I mean, if you're not just going to use one and you're going to use multiples, know what it is that you're using. Make sure you have policies and procedures that are documenting the proper use, and determine whether or not, like, for instance, if you're an organization using, like, I don't know, AnyDesk or ConnectWise Control or something like that, Screen Connect, does it need to be deployed everywhere? You probably just remote into one machine and then use that machine to pivot to the rest of your machines. Um, so those are just a couple of the things that I don't want to, like, repeat a lot of what's probably already been said, but those were the first things that came to mind, at least.
And a lot of these attacks that I've seen in the news occur when someone compromises an admin account that has the privileges needed to, run administrative tasks on the network. So we're seeing more and more guidance come out about privileged access management amongst administrative accounts. So of course you want your admins to be able to just do everything, but maybe put MFA in front of a normal task that could really be detrimental if the wrong person got access to it. So just locking down even your administrators within the remote access tools is a big quick win that you can do.
I like that you called out the need for visibility there, Justin. The principle of Cobra Kai: if you can't see, you can't fight. Right? It's always going to be the first step, is making sure that you get that visibility.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. We want to minimize the number of unknown unknowns. Try and figure out those known unknowns. And so does it make sense to, kind of auto block access from consumer remote access tools so that users that may not have malicious intent, may not be bad actors, but still are being non-compliant with the policy to not use these tools? And for teams that don't necessarily have budget for a commercial or enterprise level remote access solution, what are some things that they can do as an alternative?
I think from a preventative standpoint, one big thing you can do is application allow listing. At at some level, and it may not be, you may be allowing a lot of apps so that your org can function, but you definitely can deny, these types of apps as a class, right? So that might be something to look into. And then, I mean, the old wisdom of standard users, not admins on devices, right? You follow that thread as far as you can go. So
Yeah. Well, that is going to do it for us for this week, everybody. Thanks again, as always, for tuning in. Thank you to our panel for sharing your expertise and helping us break down some of these stories. Please do all the usual YouTube things. You've heard the spiel before. We'll be back next week with more of those top headlines for you. And in the meantime, stay safe out there, everybody. Bye-bye.